turn slow mode off, to be honest. So we're just gonna have to deal with that for now, for at least a few moments. But here we go. So leadership and the power of belief. Leaders are those individuals who live by empowering beliefs and teach others to tap their full capabilities by shifting the beliefs that have been limiting them. So earlier there's an entire section about limiting beliefs, and I think at some level, yeah, leaders are those individuals who have empowering beliefs and ultimately help people get overcome theirs. One great leader who impresses me is a teacher by the name of Marva Collins. You may have seen the 60 Minutes program or the movie that was made about her 30 years ago. Marva utilized her personal power and decided to touch the future by making a real difference in the lives of children. Her challenge: when she got to her first teaching job in what many consider to be a ghetto of Chicago, her second grade students had already decided that they didn't want to learn anything. Yet, Marva's mission is to touch these children's lives. She doesn't have a mere belief that she can impact them. She has a passionate, deep-rooted conviction that she will influence them for good. There was no limit to the extent she would go. Faced with children labeled as dyslexics and every other kind of learning or behavioral disorder, she decided that the problem was not the children, but the way they were being taught. No one was challenging them enough. As a result, these kids had no belief in themselves. They had no references of ever being pushed to break through and find out who they really were or what they were capable of. Human beings respond to challenge, and these children, she believed, needed that more than anything else. So I think that's really interesting. In the topic of leadership and the power of belief, and what Marva did, it can be really tough as a child to figure out what challenges you, to really establish challenges for yourself, to come up with goals for yourself, these personal aspirations. And I think it's really interesting to consider, Marva Collins and her leadership, and just recognizing that these kids, these children in these schools want to be challenged. I mean, all of us at some level wish to have someone be like, hey, listen, you can do this amazing feat, and it's time for you to go do it. I'm going to challenge you to go do it. So I think it's a good time for a question to discuss and consider. What is a challenge? If you don't have someone in your life who's challenging you right now, if it's a teacher or whatever, what is a challenge that you could put for yourself? If you were self-motivated or whatever, what is something you could really get yourself to do, whether it be a physical fitness accomplishment, or a mental achievement such as reading a book, or even, since we're streaming on Twitch, what is a gaming achievement that you want to do? Unlocking some sort of bonus in a game or something. So it could be anything. Learning a new language. What is something that you can or would challenge yourself on if you don't have the mentorship or leadership or guidance or mentors, teachers that are available to help you right now? So she threw out all those old books that read See Spot Run, and instead taught Shakespeare, Sophocles, and Tolstoy. All the other teachers said things like, there's no way it can happen. There's no way these kids can understand that. And as you might guess, many of them attacked Marva personally, saying that she was going to destroy these children's lives. But Marva's students not only understood the material, they thrived on it. Why? Because she believed so fervently in the uniqueness of each child's spirit and his or her ability to learn anything. She communicated with so much congruency and love that she literally got them to believe in themselves. Some of them for the first time in their young lives. The results she has consistently produced for decades have been extraordinary. I first met Marva and interviewed her at Westside Preparatory School, the private school she founded outside the Chicago city school system. After our meeting, I decided to interview some of her students. The first young man I met was 4 years old with a smile that would knock your socks off. I shook his hand. Hi, I'm Tony Robbins. Hello, Mr. Robbins. My name is Talmadge E. Griffin. I am 4 years old. What would you like to know? Well, Talmadge, tell me, what are you studying these days? Talmadge, I'm studying a lot of things, Mr. Robbins. Tony Robbins, well, what books have you read recently? Talmadge, I just finished reading Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Needless to say, I was pretty impressed. I asked him what the book was about, figuring he'd say something like it was about two guys named George and Lenny. He said, well, the main protagonist is, by this time I was a believer. Then I asked him what he had learned from the book. Mr. Robbins, I more than learned from this book. This book permeated my soul. I started to laugh and asked, what does permeate mean? To diffuse through, he said, then gave me a fuller definition than I could give you. What touched you so much in this book, Talmadge? Mr. Robbins, I noticed in a story that the children never judge anyone else by the color of their skin. Only the adults did that. What I learned from this is that although I will someday become an adult, I'll never forget the lessons of a child. Holy crap. That is powerful. A 4-year-old saying this. So, there's two books. I don't know if you're talking about Of Mice and Men, or which I have not personally read. So that 4-year-old probably by now at this point he's got to be 40 something. He must have read many more books since then. But this book itself is Awaken the Giant Within, and ultimately it's about how to take immediate control of your mental, emotional, physical, and financial destiny. But yeah, it is hard to believe that a 4-year-old would say those things. But, there are some incredible and amazing people out there, very young people, who are very brilliant, and they just needed to find the teacher to help bring it out of them. I'm sure that in your life there was something that you were doing at 4 years old that stunned your parents. I'm sure you've said something that has stunned your parents. Maybe it wasn't 4 then. Maybe you were a late bloomer or whatever, or you were whatever, right? I don't know for sure, but I'm just sharing an example. Maybe it was 6 years old, 7 years old. I don't think like the difference between a 4 and an 8-year-old, who's reading Of Mice and Men is able to define the word permeate based on the question. I don't think there's that much difference. So whether you were doing something incredible at like 4 years old or 8 years old, 10 years old, whatever. I mean, I think it's extra fascinating at 4. If you read this book, it does not talk about levitation, but if that is what you wish to do and dedicate your life to, you can work on that. But this is more about taking control of your mental, emotional, physical, and financial destiny. So, if your dedication to levitating, right? If you are empowering, if you feel that you're empowering yourself by this belief that you should or want to levitate, then it's a good time to question, is that belief holding you back in some other place, right? Like, I mean, if it's coming from a place of sarcasm, rather than a belief system, that can also affect you. Reach human perfection. That's a good question. That's up for you to determine. You got to check it out for yourself. As we read through these pages, how are you feeling? What are you thinking about it? I don't think this is about can you or if you. It's about what you want to do and achieve. So the real question you should be asking here is, what is it that you want to do? Not can I reach human perfection, not can I levitate, not can I hold my breath underwater and develop gills and create an underwater city that, I can create mermaids in or whatever. It's really, what do you want to do truly deep down in your soul, your heart, in your mind, all of these areas, physical well-being, all these things. What is it that you want to achieve? What is it you want to have, be, do? And that's the real question you got to ask yourself. So with that going continued here, I started to get teary-eyed because I saw that Marva Collins was providing this young man and so many others like him with the kinds of powerful beliefs that will continue to shape his decisions not only today, but throughout his life. Marva increases her students' quality of life by using the 3 organizing principles I talked about in the beginning of this book. She gets them to hold themselves to a higher standard. She assists them in adopting new, empowering beliefs that enable them to break through their old limitations, and she backs all this up with specific skills and strategies for lifelong success. The results. Her students become not only confident, but competent. The immediate results in terms of their academic excellence are striking, and the processional effects generated in their everyday lives are profound. Finally, I asked Talmadge, what's the most important thing that Mrs. Collins has taught you? The most important thing Mrs. Collins has taught me is that society may predict, but only I will determine my destiny. I myself have a hard time believing that a child at 4 years old said that, but even if he was just, if he was like trained to say that by Mrs. Collins, I still think that's pretty impressive, because at some level that's going to permeate throughout his life. I'm using a word that a 4-year-old gave me, permeate. So maybe we all need to remember the lessons of a child with the beliefs young Talmadge expressed so beautifully. I guarantee that he, as well as the other children in the class, will have a great opportunity to continuously interpret their lives in a way that will create the future they desire, rather than the one that most people fear. Let's review what we've learned so far. We're clear that there's a power inside us that needs to be awakened. That power starts with the capability to make conscious decisions that shape our destiny. But there's one core belief that we must explore and resolve, and this belief can be found in your answer to the question. And this is the next chapter, but right now is definitely a good time to consider, based on the questions that you've shared with me. If I read this book, can I levitate? And will I reach human perfection if I read this book? I can't guarantee you results in terms of levitation, but if you do strive for certain things, the question is, what is it that you want to strive for? What is it in your personal destiny, your life, that you really want to take control of? Is it your mental? Do you want to be funnier? Do you want to be a wittier person? Do you want to be a writer? Do you want to be an artist? Do you want to be a streamer? Your physical. How do you want your body to look and feel in the next 5 years? Where do you want your financial things to be? How do you want to be emotionally with family members and all that? Those are the big questions that this book is going to answer. So there you go. I don't think I believe the 4-year-old saying that stuff, but I'm interested by the other things. Yeah, I mean, it is hard to believe, but I have a feeling that Marva Collins, if we did the research on her, and Tony Robbins himself, that he would definitely find a lot of truth in what's happening there. So, who knows? I mean, if you don't believe that a 4-year-old saying that, when you have kids, the real question is, how are you going to, if or when you have kids, if you have a little brother, if you have a little sister that's going to, be coming soon, or a cousin, a nephew, grandchild, what's going to help you help them the most? Is it by not believing that they can be capable of reading John Steinbeck? I mean, if you prefer to just give them, Cat in the Hat books, then that's one thing. But there could be power in that belief there. So we're going to go on to the next chapter, chapter 5. The question is, can change happen in an instant? Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. So that seems like it's a Bible verse, Corinthians 15:51. I'm not familiar with that, but let's see. Let's interpret what it means. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. So my interpretation of that is that there's a mystery being presented there, and in that sense, change can happen very quick. So have I read the Bible? I have not read the Bible cover to cover, but I have read parts of it. And with that said, I imagine that Mr. Tony Robbins has. And also at the same time, I think a lot of ideas and wisdoms from the Bible do carry throughout society. Even if we don't know it, even if we don't recognize it as a biblical theme or whatever, it holds a lot of truths. So to continue on, for as long as I can remember, I've always dreamed of having the ability to help people change virtually anything in their lives. Instinctively, at an early age, I realized that to be able to help others change, I had to be able to change myself. Even in junior high school, I began to pursue knowledge through books and tapes that I thought could teach me the fundamentals of how to shift human behavior and emotion. Of course, I wanted to improve certain aspects of my own life, get myself motivated, get myself to follow through and to take action, learn how to enjoy life, and learn how to connect and bond with people. I'm not sure why, but somehow I linked pleasure to learning and sharing things that could make a difference in the quality of people's lives and lead them to appreciate and even love me. As a result, by the time I was in high school, I was known as the solutions man. If you had any problem, I was the guy to see. And I took great pride in this identity. The more I learned, the more addicted I became to learning even more. Understanding how to influence human emotion and behavior became an obsession for me. I took a speed reading class and developed a voracious appetite for books. I read close to 700 books in just a few years, almost all of them in the areas of human development, psychology, influence, and physiological development. I wanted to know anything and everything there was to know about how we can increase the quality of our lives, and tried to immediately apply it to myself as well as share it with other people. But I didn't stop with books. I became a fanatic for motivational tapes, and while still in high school, saved my money to go to different types of personal development seminars. As you can imagine, it didn't take long for me to feel like I was hearing nothing but the same messages reworked over and over again. There appeared to be nothing new, and I became a bit jaded. Just after my 21st birthday, though, I was exposed to a series of technologies that could make changes in people's lives with lightning-like speed. Simple technologies like Gestalt therapy and tools of influence like Ericksonian hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming. When I saw that these tools could really help people create changes in minutes that previously took months, years, or decades to achieve, I became an evangelist in my approach to them. I decided to commit all of my resources to mastering these technologies. And I didn't stop there. As soon as I learned something, I applied it immediately. Yeah, for sure, iPhone is a technology. I'll never forget my first week of training in neuro-linguistic programming. Now, if you want something more powerful than an iPhone, it's neuro-linguistic programming. I'll never forget my first week of training in neuro-linguistic programming. We learned things like how to eliminate a lifetime phobia in less than an hour, something that through many forms of traditional therapy could take as much as 5 years or more. On the 5th day, I turned to the psychologists and psychiatrists in the class and said, "Hey guys, let's find some phobics and cure them." They all looked at me like I was crazy. They made it very clear to me that I obviously wasn't an educated man, that we had to wait until the 6-month certification program was completed, go through a testing procedure, and if we were successful, only then would we be ready to use this material. I wasn't willing to wait, so I launched my career by appearing on radio and television programs throughout Canada and eventually the United States as well. In each of these, I talked to people about these technologies for creating change and made it clear that if we wanted to change our lives, whether it was a disempowering habit or a phobia that had been controlling us for years, that behavior or that emotional pattern could be changed in a matter of minutes, even though they might have tried to change it for years previously. That's pretty mind-blowing right there. Was this a radical concept? You bet. But I passionately argued that all changes are created in a moment. It's just that most of us wait until certain things happen before we finally decide to make a shift. If we truly understood how the brain worked, I argued, we could stop the endless process of analyzing why things had happened to us. And if we could just simply change what we linked pain and pleasure to, we could just as easily change the way our nervous system had been conditioned and take charge of our lives immediately. Hey, take care, and thanks for jumping in. Hopefully this was helpful to you. And, ask yourself the question, what is it that you want? This is me asking you, what is it that you want to do? What is it in your mental, emotional, or the physical area or the financial area of your life that you really want? And be sure to stop by again another time, and we can possibly look at those areas. Powerful. So, as you can imagine, as a young kid with no PhD who was making these controversial claims on the radio, didn't go over very well with some psychologists, with some traditionally trained mental health professionals. A few psychiatrists and psychologists attacked me, some on the air. So I learned to build my career in changing people in two principles: technology and challenge. I knew I had a superior technology, a superior way of creating change based on crucial understandings of human behavior that most traditional psychologists were not trained in, and I believed that if I challenged myself, the people I worked with enough, I could find a way to turn virtually anything around. One particular psychiatrist called me a charlatan and a liar and charged that I was making false claims. I challenged this psychiatrist to suspend his pessimism and give me an opportunity to work with one of his patients, someone he hadn't been able to change after working with her for years. It was a bold move, and at first he did not comply with my request. But after utilizing a little leverage, a technique I'll cover in the next chapter, I finally got the psychiatrist to let a patient come on her own to one of my free guest events and allow me, in front of the room, to work with her. In 15 minutes, I wiped out the woman's phobia of snakes. At the time, she'd been treated for over 7 years by the psychiatrist who attacked me. To say the least, he was amazed. But more importantly, can you imagine the references this created for me and the sense of certainty it gave me about what I could accomplish? I became a wild man. I stormed across the country demonstrating to people how quickly change could occur. I found that no matter where I went, people were initially skeptical. But as I was able to demonstrate measurable results before their eyes, I was able to get not only their attention and interest, but also their willingness to apply what I talked about to produce measurable results in their own lives. So I think that's a really powerful question or situation here in this book is, as I'm reading this, and I've read this before, but as I'm reading this now, what comes on my mind is, well, how did Tony Robbins become successful? Like, what made him famous? Did he just become famous by selling books? Did he just become famous by just because he's a giant guy and he's loud and, he's very confident that he's able to become successful or whatever? And I think the answers are right here. He believed so much in the technology that he was using to help people that he was willing to go on the radio about it, bet his career on it, his success or whatever, debate trained psychologists and psychiatrists about it, and literally prove that the technology worked. And if there's something that you believe in that powerfully, get after it. You got to do those types of things. with that said, why is it that most people think change takes so long? One reason, obviously, is that most people have tried again and again through willpower to make changes and failed. The assumption that they then make is that important changes must take a long time and be very difficult to make. In reality, it's only difficult because most of us don't know how to change. We don't have an effective strategy. Willpower by itself is not enough, not if we want to achieve lasting change. The reason we don't change quickly is that in our culture, we have a set of beliefs that prevents us from being able to utilize our inherent abilities. Culturally, we link negative associations to the idea of instant change. For most, instant change means you never really had a problem at all. If you can change that easily, why didn't you change a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, and stop complaining? For most, instant change means you never really had a problem at all. That's interesting. For example, how quickly could a person recover from the loss of a loved one and begin to feel differently? Physically, they have the capability to do it the next morning, but they don't. Why? Because we have a set of beliefs in our culture that we need to grieve for a certain period of time. How long do we have to grieve? It all depends upon your own conditioning. Think about this. If the next day after you lost a loved one, you didn't grieve, wouldn't that cause a great deal of pain in your life? First, people would immediately believe you didn't care about the loved one you lost, and based on cultural conditioning, you might begin to believe that you didn't care either. The concept of overcoming death this easily is just too painful. We choose the pain of grieving rather than changing our emotions until we're satisfied that our rules and cultural standards about what's appropriate have been met. There are, in fact, cultures where people celebrate when someone dies. Why? They believe that God always knows the right time for us to leave the earth and that death is a graduation. They also believe that if you were to grieve about someone's death, you would be indicating nothing but your own lack of understanding of life, and you would be demonstrating your own selfishness. Since this person has gone on to a better place, you're feeling sorry for no one but yourself. They link pleasure to death and pain to grieving, so grief is not a part of their culture. I'm not saying that grief is bad or wrong. I'm just saying that we need to realize it's based upon our beliefs that pain takes a long time to recover from. And this is so interesting right now. We're going to take a quick break here and just consider this idea. Like, he gave the example of pain or overcoming the pain of grief or overcoming grief. And I think that's really interesting because there's the grief from the situation itself and how it affects you. And then there's the grief that you're going to be potentially getting from the cultural side of it. So at some level, and I'm just basing it on this example, I'm not saying that this is like, a universal thing, but at some level, it's important to think about, where are our emotions, where our actual truth emotions are, how we feel about certain things, how we feel about people, how we feel about our work, how we feel about life, how we feel about ourselves. And there's that element of it, the self, but also where we believe we have to be, where we believe others believe us to be, right? So in this example, I was talking about, you're going to get pain from your family who thinks you don't care, or you're going to get pain from culturally feeling that you have to care. And if you don't care, then, it's like a disconnect there. So I think that's a powerful idea. Like, where we feel society believes we should be, and really addressing that. So I'm sure he'll go into like some more ways of how to tackle these concepts, but right now is a good time to question not just our own personal what we believe we need to do in certain situations, but also why we do those things in relation to how we feel others believe we should do it. I'm not saying to go against social norms or cultural norms or anything, but really important to consider how it is affecting our mental, physical, emotional, financial destiny. There are, in fact, or as I spoke from coast to coast, I kept encouraging people to make life changing shifts, often in 30 minutes or less. There was no doubt I created controversy, and the more success I had, the more assured and intense I became as well. To tell the truth, I was occasionally confrontational and more than a little cocky. I started out doing private therapy, helping people turn things around, and then began to do seminars. Within a few short years, I was traveling on the road 3 weeks out of 4, constantly pushing myself and giving my all as I worked to extend my ability to positively impact the largest number of people I could in the shortest period of time. The results I produced became somewhat legendary. Eventually, the psychiatrists and psychologists stopped attacking and actually became interested in learning my techniques for use with their own patients. At the same time, my attitudes changed and I became more balanced, but I never lost my passion for wanting to help as many people as I could. One day, about 4.5 years ago, not long after Unlimited Power was first published, I was signing books after giving one of my business seminars in San Francisco. All the while, I was reflecting on the incredible rewards that had come from following through on the commitments I had made to myself while still in high school. The commitments to grow, expand, contribute, and thereby make a difference. I realized as each smiling face came forward how deeply grateful I was to have developed skills that can make a difference in helping people to change virtually anything in their lives. As the last group of people finally began to disperse, one man approached me and asked, "Do you recognize me?" Having seen literally thousands of people in that month alone, I had to admit that I didn't. He said, "Think about it for a second." After looking at him for a few moments, suddenly it clicked. I said, "New York City, right?" He said, "That's true." I said, "I did some private work with you in helping you wipe out your smoking habit." He nodded again. I said, "Wow, that was years ago. How are you doing?" He reached in his pocket, pulled out a package of Marlboros, pointed at me with an accusing look on his face, and said, "You failed." Then he launched into a tirade about my inability to program him effectively. I have to admit, I was rattled. After all, I had built my career on my absolute willingness to put myself on the line, on my total commitment to challenging myself and other people, on my dedication to trying anything in order to create lasting and effective change with lightning-like speed. As this man continued to berate my ineffectiveness in curing the smoking habit, I wondered what could have gone wrong. Could it be that my ego had outgrown my true level of capability and skill? Gradually, I began to ask myself better questions. What could I learn from this situation? What was really going on here? "What happened after we worked together?" I asked him, expecting to hear that he had resumed smoking a week or so after the therapy. It turned out that he'd stopped smoking for 2.5 years after I'd worked with him for less than an hour. But one day he took a puff and now he was back to his 4-pack-a-day habit, plainly blaming me because the change had not endured. Then it hit me. This man was not being completely unreasonable. After all, I had been teaching something called neuro-linguistic programming. Think about the word programming. It suggests that you could come to me, I would program you, and then everything would be fine. You wouldn't have to do anything. Out of my desire to help people at the deepest level, I made the very mistake that I saw other leaders in the personal development industry make. I had begun to take responsibility for other people's changes. That day, I realized I had inadvertently placed the responsibility with the wrong person, me, and that this man or any one of the other thousands of people I'd worked with could easily go back to their old behaviors if they ran into a difficult enough challenge because they saw me as the person responsible for their change. If things didn't work out, they could just conveniently blame somebody else. They had no personal responsibility and therefore no pain if they didn't follow through on their new behavior. I think this is some really important stuff right here on the topic of change. Here's a person who dedicated, I don't know how many years, but by this time he'd already finished the book and spent many years doing this work. And up until that time, he had taken responsibility for helping virtually everybody change. But I think it's important to realize that at some level, it can't just be about your ability or my ability, right? So first person here, it can't just be about my ability. In his case, his ability to make or help people change, or help people become better, or help people take control of their mental, physical, emotional, financial destiny. It really is up to the other person to do the things that they want to do. And I think that comes from this idea that you can't have somebody else do your push-ups for you. And it can be an ego thing. If you think that you're going to be the person to make people change, to make people do what you want, to make people do the things that they should be doing according to you, at some level that is a self thing rather than an other person thing. Especially if you're a coach or a therapist or another type of mental health professional or something like that, or a manager or some type of leader, that if you're constantly taking responsibility for other actions, at some level, right, management, they needed to be responsible for the entire team, so whatever happens to the team is going to affect them. But at the same time, when it comes to certain roles like coaching and things, you have to appreciate the idea that the other person is going to do what they want to do. And you can help them, guide them. You can help provide guidance, but are they truly going to last forever, or are they going to hit a challenge and fall back to their habits? So that's a really good question to consider there. Continuing on, as a result of this new perspective, I decided to change the metaphor for what I do. I stopped using the word programming because while I continue to use my many NLP techniques, I believe it's inaccurate. A better metaphor for long-term change is conditioning. This was solidified for me when a few days later my wife brought in a piano tuner for our new baby grand. This man was a true craftsman. He worked on every string in that piano for literally hours and hours, stretching each one to just the right level of tension to create the perfect vibration. At the end of the day, the piano played magnificently. When I asked him how much I owed, he said, "Don't worry, I'll drop off a bill on my next visit." My response was, "Next visit? What do you mean?" He said, "I'll be back tomorrow, and then I'll come back once a week for the next month. Then I'll return every 3 months for the rest of the year, only because you live by the ocean." I said, "What are you talking about? Didn't you already make all the adjustments on the piano? Isn't it set up properly?" He said, "Yes, but these strings are strong. To keep them at the perfect level of tension, we've got to condition them to stay at this level. I've got to come back and retighten them on a regular basis until the wire is trained to stay at this level." I thought, what a business this guy has. But I also got a great lesson that day. This is exactly what we have to do if we're going to succeed in creating long-term change. Once we effect a change, we should reinforce it immediately. Then we have to condition our nervous systems to succeed, not just once, but consistently. You wouldn't go to an aerobics class just one time and say, "Okay, now I've got a great body and I'll be healthy for life." The same is true of your emotions and behavior. We've got to condition ourselves for success, for love, for breaking through our fears, and through that conditioning, we can develop patterns that automatically lead us to consistent, lifelong success. My goodness. I had read this book before, but I didn't really catch on to this concept right here of how neurolinguistic programming evolved into what he calls conditioning, because that's a powerful concept. You think of neurolinguistic programming, you think, oh, well, hey, instant change, because that's what this book ultimately talks about is, yes, people can make changes in an instant, at least up until now. But how do you make it last the long term? How do you make it so that it's not just a short-term change? It's something that's going to help you, benefit you for the long term, right? Because we can all reach short-term goals, near-term goals, quick goals, but it's consistent conditioning of working towards certain goals that's really going to help us in the long term. So good thing right there. I think that works a lot with like weight loss goals, work goals, most goals, personal growth, mental goals, skills that we want to build. anyone can say, hey, I'm motivated right now. I'm going to go pick up a book. I'm going to start reading it, and I'm going to do something with it. But how do you condition yourself to continuously do that day after day after day for 1 year, 2 years? I mean, let alone like 6 months, 8 months. I saw a fact the other day, or that gyms, at the beginning of every year, gym memberships just skyrocket. They just like 10x. They go up by like 10 times. But within the first 8 weeks, the number of people that have continued their regular gym activity has dropped by like 85%. And that's just the gym. You can imagine in other areas of life, I mean, that's a good like base point. But if you think about every other goal people have, where does that fall off happen? With that said, we need to remember that pain and pleasure shape all our behaviors, and that pain and pleasure can change our behaviors. Conditioning requires that we understand how to use pain and pleasure. What you're going to learn in the next chapter is the science that I've developed to create any change you want in your life. I call it the science of neuro-associative conditioning, NAC, or NAC. What is it? Neuro-associative conditioning, NAC, is a step-by-step process that can condition your nervous system to associate pleasure to those things you want to continuously move toward, and pain to those things you need to avoid in order to succeed consistently in your life without constant effort or willpower. That's pretty cool, right? How can you condition yourself to succeed consistently without constant effort or willpower? It's easy. Remember, it's the feelings that we've been conditioned to associate in our nervous systems, our neuroassociations, that determine our emotions and our behavior. When we take control of our neuroassociations, we take control of our lives. This chapter will show you how to condition your neuroassociations so that you are empowered to take action and produce the results you've always dreamed of. It's designed to give you the knack of creating consistent and lasting change. And this section begins with a quote. Things do not change, we change. Henry David Thoreau. What are the 2 changes everyone wants in life? Good question. Isn't it true that we all want to change either how we feel about things or behaviors? Or 2, 1, how we feel about things, or 2, our behaviors. If a person has been through a tragedy, they were abused as a child, they were raped, lost a loved one, are lacking in self-esteem, this person clearly will remain in pain until the sensation they link to themselves, these events or situations, are changed. Likewise, if a person overeats, drinks, smokes, or takes drugs, they have a set of behaviors that must change. The only way this can happen is by linking pain to the old behavior and pleasure to a new behavior. And here's a really interesting thing. This book tackles some very, very traumatic concepts and talks about change. And those concepts can, be very controversial because the people who struggle from many challenges have tried and they've done things. And, it's interesting to see what he says can potentially help people get through some of the, most terrible situations that a human being can find themselves in. With that said, this sounds so simple, but what I found is that in order for us to be able to create true change that lasts, we need to develop a specific system for utilizing any techniques you and I learn to create change. And there are many. Every day I'm picking up new skills and new technologies from a variety of sciences. I continue to use many of the NLP and Ericksonian techniques that I began my career with. Some of them are the finest available. Yet, I always come back to utilizing them within the framework of the 6 fundamental steps that the science of NAC represents. I created NAC as a way to use any technology for change. What NAC really provides is a specific syntax, an order and sequence of ways to use any set of skills to create long-term change. I'm sure you recall that in the first chapter I said that one of the key components of creating long-term change is a shift in beliefs. The first belief we must have if we're going to create change quickly is that we can change now. Again, most people in our society have unconsciously linked a lot of pain to the idea of being able to change quickly. On one hand, we desire to change quickly, and on the other, our cultural programming teaches us that to change quickly means that maybe we never even had a problem at all. Maybe we were just faking it or being lazy. We must adopt the belief that we can change in a moment. After all, if you can create a problem in a moment, you should be able to create a solution too. That's good right there. If you believe you can create a problem in a moment, which we can, you should be able to create a solution for that problem too. Our minds are amazing. If we can create a problem, we can create a solution. You and I both know that when people finally do change, they do it in a moment, don't they? There's an instant when the change occurs. Why not make that instant now? Usually it's the getting ready to change that takes people time. We've all heard the joke. Question: how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Answer: just one, but it's very expensive. It takes a long time and the light bulb has to want to change. Garbage. You and I have to get ourselves ready to change. You and I have to become our own counselors and master our own lives. That's powerful right there. So step one, first belief, I'm going to earmark this page, is that we must believe that we can change now, that we can change in virtually an instant. Change now. The second belief that you and I must have if we're going to create long-term change is that we're responsible for our own change, not anyone else. In fact, there are 3 specific beliefs about responsibility that a person must have if they're going to create long-term change. First, so that's important too. So we are the catalyst of our own change. We can't depend on someone else for that. We're responsible. So first we must believe something must change. Not that it should change, not that it could or ought to, but that it absolutely must. So often I hear people say, this weight should come off. Procrastinating is a lousy habit. My relationship should be better. But you know we can should all over ourselves and our life still won't change. It's only when something becomes a must that we begin the process of truly doing what's necessary to shift the quality of our lives. 2. Second, we must not only believe that things must change, but we must believe I must change. We must see ourselves as the source of the change. Otherwise, we'll always be looking for someone else to make the changes for us. And we'll always have someone else to blame when it doesn't work out. We must be the source of our change if the change is going to last. Third, we have to believe I can change it. So something must change. I must change it. I can change it. Third, we have to believe I can change it. Without believing that it's possible for us to change, as we've already discussed in the last chapter, we stand no chance of carrying through on our desires. Without these 3 core beliefs, I can assure you that any change you make stands a good chance of being only temporary. Please don't misunderstand me. It's always smart to get a great coach, an expert, a therapist, a counselor, someone who's already produced these results for many other people, to support you in taking the proper steps to conquer your phobia or quit smoking or lose weight. But in the end, you have to be the source of your change. The interaction I had with the relapsed smoker that day triggered me to ask new questions of myself about the sources of change. Why was I so effective throughout the years? What had set me apart from others who tried to help these same people who had equal intention but were unable to produce the results? And when I tried to create a change in someone and failed, what had happened to them? What had prevented me from producing the change was that I was really committed to helping. What had prevented me from producing the change that I was really committed to helping this person make? Then I began to ask larger questions, like, what really makes change happen in any form of therapy? All therapies work some of the time, and all forms of therapy failed to work at other times. I also began to notice two other interesting things. Some people went to therapists I didn't think were particularly skilled and still managed to make their desired change in a very short period of time in spite of the therapist. I also saw other people who went to therapists I considered excellent, yet were not helped to produce the results they wanted in the short term. After a few years of witnessing thousands of transformations looking for the common denominator, finally it hit me. We can analyze our problems for years, but nothing changes until we change the sensations we link to an experience in our nervous system. And we have the capacity to do this quickly and powerfully if we understand the power of your brain. What a magnificent gift we were born with. I've learned that our brains can help us accomplish virtually anything we desire. The brain's capacity is nearly unfathomable. Most of us know little about how it works, so let's briefly focus upon this unparalleled vessel of power and how we can condition it to consistently produce the results we want in our lives. Alexa, what time is it?
It's 10:58 a.m.
Realize that your brain eagerly awaits your every command, ready to carry out anything you ask of it. All it requires is a small amount of fuel, the oxygen in your blood, and a little glucose. In terms of its intricacy and power, the brain defies even our greatest modern computer technology. It is capable of processing up to 30 billion bits of information per second, and it boasts the equivalent of 6,000 miles of wiring and cabling. Typically, the human nervous system contains about 28 billion neurons, nerve cells designed to conduct impulses. Without neurons, our nervous systems would be unable to interpret the information we receive through our sense organs, unable to convey it to the brain, and unable to carry out instructions from the brain as to what to do. Each of these neurons is a tiny, self-contained computer capable of processing about 1 million bits of information. Oh my goodness. Just contemplating that, doesn't it make you think, like, what can I possibly be doing with this amazing thing inside my head? There's way more that I should be pursuing. These neurons act independently, but they also communicate with, and that comes down to, I think that's a powerful moment to just reiterate this previous idea in the book, is to if you can't get your challenges from a mentor, a teacher, a manager, a boss, a guide, a friend, if you don't have a teacher that can help you in those areas, if you don't have a mentor, then you really got to be self-motivated. You really got to be able to tell yourself, like, hey, I need to challenge myself more because I'm capable of so much more. These neurons act independently, but they also communicate with other neurons through an amazing network of 100,000 miles of nerve fibers. The power of your brain to process information is staggering, especially when you consider that a computer, even the fastest computer, can make connections only one at a time. By contrast, a reaction in one neuron can spread to hundreds of thousands of others in a span of less than 20 milliseconds. To give you perspective, that's about 10 times less than it takes for your eye to blink. A neuron takes 1,000,000 times longer to send a signal than a typical computer switch. Yet the brain can recognize a familiar face in less than a second, a feat beyond the ability of the most powerful computers. The brain achieves this speed because, unlike the step-by-step computer, its billions of neurons can all attack a problem simultaneously. So with all this immense power at our disposal, why can't we get ourselves to feel happy consistently? Why can't we change a behavior like smoking or drinking, overeating or procrastinating? Why can't we immediately shake off depression, break through our frustration, and feel joyous every day of our lives? We can. Each of us has at our disposal the most incredible computer on the planet. But unfortunately, no one gave us an owner's manual. Most of us have no idea how our brains really work. So we attempt to think our way into a change when in reality our behavior is rooted in our nervous systems in the form of physical connections, neural connections, or what I call neuro associations. And this is a powerful time to simply reflect on just how powerful our brain is, but at the same time, just how easily we, our minds, our spirits, our physical bodies can be manipulated, tricked, controlled by something or someone else. Because you got to think about it, this idea of how it takes, so here's what I'm talking about. A neuron takes 1,000,000 times longer to send a signal than a typical computer switch, yet the brain can recognize a familiar face in less than a second. A feat beyond the ability of the most powerful computers, the brain achieves this speed because unlike the step-by-step computer, its billions of neurons can all attack a problem simultaneously. Simultaneously is a key word, because just to think about how we can, anytime we take in sensory information, whether it be a word or a word someone says or a look someone gives us, or driving down the road, our mind and body needs to interpret road information, or watching television or a movie, we need to interpret the emotions of the actor, we interpret their words, we're doing all of these things, watching an advertisement. So much information is getting bombarded at any given time, and if we're not focused, if we don't realize just how quickly our brain is going to look at something and consider it as a problem, or simultaneously affect our body, how these things are going to simultaneously affect our body, we can really get pulled into other people's worlds as opposed to our own. We get pulled into the worlds of others, the ideas of others. We get sucked into an advertisement. We could get sucked into someone else's feelings, someone else's goals, someone else's ambitions, or forget our own personal power if we're not conscious and cognizant of the way our mind works. And that's ultimately at the same time where we can hold ourselves back, the disempowering beliefs that have been ingrained in us over time, that have been repeated to us, and things like that. So, good time to consider what empowering beliefs are, what our disempowering beliefs are, and what we're allowing to feed our minds on a day-to-day basis, and considering just the idea that our brains are processing that information, our minds are taking in all that information, and they're considering whether it's going to be helpful to us or unhelpful, and it might even process unhelpful information as helpful and helpful information as unhelpful, but constantly on the defense there, our minds, fight, flight, can I eat it, can I have sex with it, is it going to hurt me, do I have to fight it, should I run from it, can I fight it, can I beat it, should I run from it, or should I just stand still and hope it doesn't, see me? So things like that, very important ideas. And when we think about that from our mind's instant reaction, I think it's called the amygdala, right? The instant action from our amygdala that determines whether something is a friend or foe. That instant reaction can just spark all sorts of wild things in our head. But anyway, with that said, that is the end of this section. It was chapter 5. We'll be continuing on in another video. So if you want to hear the continuation or learn more about this, check out the book yourself, Awaken the Giant Within, or stay tuned for the next episode. And thank you for being here.